She shouldn't have been alive. 72 hours in the Barents Sea, water temperature -4 degrees Celsius. 3 days of Arctic darkness, ice-choked swells, and wind that could strip skin from bone in minutes. They expected to pull up a body. Instead, the woman floating on that shattered wreckage grabbed the rescue swimmer's wrist the moment he touched her. A grip so precise, so deliberate, it stopped his heart cold. And she would not let go of the rifle, even then, even half dead, even with ice crystals in her lungs. If you've never seen this channel before, hit subscribe right now. Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story travels. And stay until the end. Because what they found inside that weapon changed everything. The SH-60 Seahawk came in low over the water at 0340 hours, running lights off, rotors hammering against a 40-knot crosswind that made the airframe shudder like it was coming apart at the seams. Commander Mason Reed sat in the jump seat with both hands braced against the bulkhead, watching the FLIR feed on the monitor bolted beside the crew door. The thermal image was grainy, washed out by sea spray, and the kind of cold that made electronics stupid. But there was something out there, a heat signature. Faint, inconsistent. The kind of reading that made experienced aircrew argue about whether it was debris, wildlife, or wishful thinking. It was Reed who'd called the deviation. "How long has that signal been sitting there?" he'd asked 40 minutes earlier, when the watch officer had flagged it as a probable ghost return. 3 days, sir. First appeared on Thursday's satellite pass. We marked it as wreckage scatter from the Norwegian cargo incident. Cargo incidents don't pulse. Nobody had argued with him. That was either the benefit of rank or the benefit of being right enough times that people had stopped questioning your instincts. Reed wasn't sure which. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. Now the Seahawk was descending, and Chief Petty Officer Evan Briggs was clipping his rescue harness with the casual economy of movement that came from doing something so many times it no longer required conscious thought. Briggs had pulled survivors out of the North Atlantic, the Bering Strait, and once, memorably and improbably, from a capsized research vessel 300 miles south of Svalbard. He had seen what prolonged cold water immersion did to a human being. He knew the math. He knew the biology. He expected a corpse. "Signal's cleaner on descent," the pilot said over comms. "Definite thermal differential. It's either a person or a very confused seal." "How big?" Briggs asked. "Human-sized, maybe smaller." Briggs looked at Reed. Reed looked at the monitor. "Put me down," Briggs said. "Bad." The water hit him like a wall. Even through the dry suit, even with the thermal underlayer and the insulated gloves, the Barents Sea in January communicated something primitive and absolute. A message that had nothing to do with temperature readings or medical textbooks. It said, "You do not belong here." It said, "Nothing belongs here." It said, "Go back." Briggs had heard that message before. He kicked through it. The wreckage was spread across roughly 40 meters of open water. Composite panels, sections of what looked like fiberglass hull, a tangle of synthetic rope still attached to something that had once been a cleat. Whatever vessel this had come from, it hadn't just sunk. It had been broken apart. The pattern of the debris told Briggs that much. The scatter radius was wrong for a controlled sinking, wrong for a weather event, wrong for equipment failure. This debris had been blown outward from a central point. Whatever force had done it had been fast and total. He didn't think too hard about that. Not yet. He found her 15 meters from the largest section of hull. She was face up on a piece of decking maybe 1.5 meters square, arms spread, frost coating her hair and her jacket and the length of her lashes. The rifle was across her chest. Both hands were wrapped around it. Not resting, not accidental. Wrapped. Fingers interlaced around the receiver with the kind of deliberate positioning you used when you knew you might lose consciousness and you needed something to stay with you regardless. Briggs had his arm under her shoulders before he registered that her eyes were open. "Ma'am." Her hand caught his wrist. Not a grab, not a flail. A catch. Thumb and forefinger locking onto the radial pulse point with a precision that sent a cold shock through him that had nothing to do with the water temperature. Her grip was controlled. It was trained. And her eyes, gray, frost pale, focusing on his face with an alertness that was medically impossible given what she'd been through. Her eyes did not look like the eyes of a person who had almost died. They looked like the eyes of a person who had decided not to. "Don't," she said. One word. Her voice was destroyed, cracked down to a rasp, barely audible over the rotors in the wind, but the word was clear. "Ma'am, I need to—" The rifle. Her fingers tightened fractionally on his wrist. "Don't touch the rifle." Briggs looked at her. He looked at the weapon across her chest. A custom platform, long-barreled, with a suppressor that had partially detached, and a scope system he'd never seen on any standard military configuration. He looked back at her face. "Okay," he said. "Okay, we're not touching the rifle." Her grip relaxed. Not completely, but enough. He got the rescue sling around her without disturbing the weapon. He couldn't have explained afterward why he honored that, why he didn't just remove the rifle for safety and efficiency. There was something in her eyes that told him the rifle staying with her was not a preference. It was a condition. On the way up, she didn't lose consciousness. She should have. By every physiological metric Briggs understood, she should have been in severe hypothermic cardiac suppression, her core temperature so far below functional range that coherent thought was impossible. Instead, she lay in the sling with the rifle still across her chest and her eyes open, watching the Seahawk's belly come toward her as the hoist reeled them in, and she did not make a sound. Reed was waiting at the door. He reached down to help bring her in, and for just a moment, less than a second, her eyes found his face and something moved through them. Not fear, not relief. Something more like assessment, like she was already filing him into a category and deciding what that meant. "Get her below," Reed said, "and nobody touches that weapon until I say so." The Arctic Forward Operating Station, AFOS Kestrel, officially, sat on a fortified artificial island 11 kilometers off the Norwegian coast, technically in international waters, and practically in the middle of nowhere. It existed as a joint monitoring and rapid response facility, which was a precise and bureaucratic way of saying it, was a place where people watched things that weren't supposed to be watched and responded to things that weren't supposed to be happening. Reed had commanded it for 14 months. He had learned not to be surprised by what the Barents Sea occasionally delivered. He had not expected this. The station's medical officer, Lieutenant Commander Patricia Voss, came out of the treatment bay 40 minutes after they'd brought the woman in. Her expression was the specific blank that Voss used when she was processing something her training hadn't prepared her for. "How is she?" Reed asked. "Stable." Voss paused, which should be physiologically impossible. "What's her core temp?" "Current core temp is 34.1, moderately hypothermic." Voss said the next part carefully, like she was checking each word before she released it. 72 hours of exposure at those water temperatures should have produced core temperatures in the 28 to 30 degree range. Lethal range, in most cases. She's either been intermittently out of the water, which the debris pattern doesn't support, or her body was doing something during those 3 days that I can't fully account for. Meaning? Meaning her metabolic response to the cold is not normal. Her peripheral vasoconstriction is extreme. We're talking textbook diving reflex activation, the kind you see in trained breath-hold divers and cold water athletes who've spent years conditioning their autonomic response. But beyond that, Voss stopped. Started again. Her muscle tissue shows chronic conditioning consistent with high altitude and cold weather training over many years. This woman has spent a significant portion of her life in environments designed to kill people. Her body has adapted to it. Reed absorbed that. Injuries? Lacerations on her hands, consistent with gripping rough material. The wreckage, I'd guess. Mild frostbite on the ears and nose, minimal given the exposure duration. Dehydration. Caloric depletion. Another pause. That's it. No trauma? No trauma inconsistent with the conditions. What about ID, biometrics? Voss's expression shifted. That's the other thing. I took her prints for the medical record, ran them through the system as protocol. She met Reed's eyes. No match anywhere. We pushed it through NATO medical, US military, European civilian systems. Nothing. She doesn't exist in any database we have access to. The silence between them lasted long enough to become significant. And the rifle? Reed asked. Still with her. She wouldn't let go of it during the examination. I made the call not to push it. She was cooperative on everything else, and I didn't want to destabilize her when she's this close to the edge physiologically. Reed nodded slowly. He turned and walked to the door of the treatment bay and looked through the small reinforced window. The woman, young, maybe late 20s, dark hair fanned out on the pillow and still carrying frost at the ends, lay on the bed with the rifle alongside her, her right hand resting on the stock. Her eyes were closed. She could have been sleeping. She wasn't sleeping. Reed had spent enough time around trained people to know the difference between sleep and controlled rest. Her chest rose and fell with a deliberate rhythm. Her jaw was slightly set. Whatever was happening behind those closed eyes, it wasn't passive. He walked to his office and locked the door and spent 45 minutes on an encrypted line trying to locate any record of any vessel, commercial, private, military, or research, that had been reported missing or destroyed in the Barents Sea in the last 2 weeks. He found nothing that matched the debris pattern, nothing that explained a young woman alone on a piece of wreckage with a custom-built precision rifle and fingerprints that had been surgically removed, not worn down, not degraded. Removed. That had been Voss's word. The friction ridge patterns on all 10 fingers showed scarring consistent with chemical or laser ablation. It had been done professionally, probably years ago, and it had been done thoroughly. Someone had worked very hard to ensure that if this woman was ever found, she would not be identifiable. Reed pulled Petty Officer Second Class Damon Yates, his on-station intelligence analyst, at 0600 and told him to run everything they had on the rifle. Serial numbers, if any. Manufacturer markings. Platform identification. He told Yates to be quiet about it and to bring whatever he found directly to Reed without logging it in the station system. Yates had looked at him with the careful neutrality of someone who understood that they were being asked to do something that existed in a gray area and had decided that Reed's judgment was worth following into gray areas. Yes, sir, Yates had said, and that was the end of the conversation. The report came back 3 hours later. Yates laid it on Reed's desk and stood with his hands clasped in front of him, which was his body language for, I found something and I don't know what to do with it. No serial number, Yates said, completely stripped, but the platform itself. I went through every custom and semi-custom long-range precision system in the military and civilian databases I have access to. No match. Whoever built this started from scratch or modified an existing chassis so extensively that the original is unrecognizable. Manufacturer markings? None. The barrel is hand-lapped. The trigger assembly is custom. I mean genuinely custom, not aftermarket custom. Someone machined this. The scope is the most identifiable component, but it's a proprietary design with no commercial equivalent. The glass is exceptional. I mean exceptional. The coating and objective diameter suggest capability well beyond any system currently in NATO inventory. Reed looked at the rifle, now lying on his desk in a soft case that Yates had found. What's the range capability? Yates hesitated. Theoretical maximum effective range. And I want to emphasize theoretical, because no standard system in the world is certified past 2,500 meters. But based on the barrel length, the chamber dimensions, the scope magnification, and the aerodynamic suppressor design, he stopped. Yates. 3,000 to 4,000 meters, sir. Maybe beyond. The number sat in the room like something with weight. That's not possible, Reed said. No, sir. Yates agreed. It's really not. Ichets. The woman woke at 1400. Reed was there because he'd been checking the bay every 2 hours and the timing happened to align. He'd brought coffee. 2 cups. Not because he was certain she'd want it, but because people generally became more conversational when they were warm and had something to do with their hands, and Reed needed her to become conversational. She was sitting up when he came in, which was not what the medical protocol said she should be doing 16 hours after a 72-hour Arctic exposure event. Her back was straight. The rifle was across her lap with her right hand on the stock. She looked at him when he entered with those same gray eyes, and the assessment was back. That quick, thorough cataloging of information that happened in the first second and told him she'd already decided exactly who he was and what he likely wanted. He held up the coffee. I wasn't sure how you take it. Black, she said. Her voice was still rough, but the rasp had improved. It was now the voice of someone with a bad cold rather than the voice of someone who had spent 3 days screaming into a wind that wasn't there to listen. He handed her the cup and sat in the chair beside the bed and didn't say anything for a moment. He'd found that silence was productive when deployed correctly. Most people rushed to fill it. The ones who didn't were the ones worth waiting for. She held the cup in both hands and let it warm her palms and looked at the wall opposite. Not ignoring him, just not rushing. You want to know who I am, she said. I want to know if you're going to be all right. She glanced at him sideways. That's diplomatic. I'm a diplomatic person. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but in that neighborhood. I'm going to be fine. The doctor disagrees. She says you should be hypothermic, and she doesn't know why you're not. She's working from standard parameters. The woman looked back at the wall. I've spent a long time making sure standard parameters don't apply to me. That takes a specific kind of training. Yes. Military? She was quiet for a moment. Adjacent. Reed turned his coffee cup in his hands. You want to tell me your name? Elena. Elena what? Just Elena, for now. She said it without apology and without evasion. A statement of what was available, nothing more. Okay. He let that settle. Elena, that rifle on your lap. My weapons technician tells me it's capable of effective engagement past 3,000 meters. He also tells me it doesn't exist in any database we have. No serial number, no manufacturer, no record of any kind. He's right. You want to tell me about it? Her hand tightened slightly on the stock. A micro-expression of body language so small he almost missed it. Almost. Not yet, she said. Is there evidence on it? Inside it? The question landed differently than he'd intended, and he saw it. A fractional stillness in her posture. A recalibration. He'd hit something without knowing where he was aiming. Why would you think that? She said. Carefully. Too carefully for the question to be casual. Because you've been holding on to it for 3 days in conditions that should have killed you. People don't do that for a weapon. They do that for what a weapon contains. The silence stretched. You're perceptive, Elena said finally. I've been told. She looked at him fully for the first time. Not the quick assessment, but a sustained look that lasted long enough to communicate that whatever she was measuring it seriously. He held it without shifting. Not yet, she said again. But soon. Chatti. Reed gave his weapons technician, Chief Petty Officer Lucas Mercer, access to the rifle at 1630 hours with 2 conditions. Elena had to consent, and the rifle never left the medical bay. He wasn't sure why he'd included the second condition. Something about removing it from her physical proximity felt wrong in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Elena had agreed to let Mercer examine the exterior. Just the exterior. Mercer was a compact man in his mid-30s who'd come to the Navy via a mechanical engineering program he'd abandoned after 2 semesters because the lab work was less interesting than taking apart every firearm he could get his hands on. He had a talent for weapons, the way some people had a talent for music. Not just competence, but a kind of intimate understanding that went past technical knowledge into something closer to intuition. Reed trusted Mercer's read on hardware the way he trusted Voss's read on bodies. Mercer spent 20 minutes with the rifle, not disassembling it, just examining the exterior with a loupe and a penlight and the focused quiet of someone reading a document in a language they mostly understood. Elena watched him from the bed. She didn't interfere. She tracked every movement of his hands with an attention that made it clear she would know immediately if he strayed past the agreed perimeter. Finally, Mercer set down the loupe and straightened up. This is hand-built, he said. Completely. I mean, someone started with raw materials and machined every component from scratch, or modified existing components past any point of recognition. He looked at Reed. The barrel alone. Do you know how long it takes to properly hand-lap a barrel of this length? Weeks. Months. To get it this clean. This is a project. Someone spent a serious amount of time and money and expertise on this. Can you estimate the builder? No, I've never seen work like this. It's not military production. No military does this level of individual hand fitting. It's not any private builder I know. Whoever made this wasn't building a rifle. They were building an instrument. He paused. A very specific instrument for a very specific purpose. What purpose? Mercer looked at Elena. Elena looked back at him with an expression that gave nothing. Extreme distance, Mercer said. Beyond any certified standard. The aerodynamics, the chambering, the barrel length. This system was designed to do something at a range that doesn't exist in any current operational manual. He turned back to Reed. Commander, I'd like to examine the interior. No, Elena said. Her voice was quiet. The word was not. Mercer looked at Reed. Reed looked at Elena. Is the interior compromised? Reed asked. Mechanically, I mean. Is there a safety concern? No. Then I'm going to ask you to trust us a little. You've done nothing to earn it yet. The bluntness of it landed without hostility, which somehow made it more effective than if she'd said it with heat. Reed studied her for a moment. She wasn't being difficult. She was being precise. There was a difference. That's fair, he said. Mercer looked between them. I'm not going anywhere, he said finally, pulling up the chair on the other side of the bed. I'll just sit here and stare at it until someone changes their mind. Elena looked at him. Then, and Reed caught it because he was watching for exactly this. Something in her shoulders shifted. Not much, but the held breath quality of her posture softened, fractionally, in the way that happened when a person who had been braced for the worst started to suspect they might not need to be. You're the weapons technician, she said to Mercer. Chief Mercer, yes, ma'am. You've examined a lot of custom builds. Some. And you've never seen this. Not even close. A beat, too. There's something in the stock, she said, a module. You won't find it unless you know exactly where to look. Don't touch it. Don't try to remove it. Her eyes found Reed's. Not yet. Not until I decide you're worth trusting. Reed nodded once. Understood. He meant it. The fact that he meant it surprised him slightly. Oops. He was still in his office at 2100 hours when Yates appeared in the doorway with the specific expression that meant something had changed. Not urgency. Yates wasn't built for urgency, but a careful, tightly managed alertness. What? Reed said. Yates set a single printed sheet on the desk. I ran a pattern analysis on the debris field, cross-referenced the composition and scatter radius with incident reports in the region. Reed looked at the sheet. There was a grid of data points and a short paragraph that Yates had summarized at the bottom in the economical language of someone who'd learned to reduce bad news to its minimum essential elements. The debris originated from a private vessel registered out of Tromsø, Yates said. Maritime records show it departed 7 days ago with a crew of 3. Its last log position was 200 kilometers from where we found her. Reed read the summary, read it again. What destroyed it? The debris fragmentation pattern is consistent with a shaped charge detonation. Interior mounted. Someone put an explosive device inside the hull and triggered it remotely. Yates's voice didn't change. The vessel wasn't registered in her name, and the listed crew don't appear in any military database. But the registration traces back through 2 shell companies to a private defense contractor based in Vienna. Name of the contractor? Yates pointed to the bottom of the sheet. Reed read the name. Read it twice. Turned it over in his mind like an unfamiliar object. Run that name through everything you have, he said. Cross-reference it with any senior personnel, any DoD contracts, any... I already did. Yates reached over and flipped the sheet. On the back was a photograph, pulled from a public corporate database, a press release photo, the kind companies used for executive announcements and charity galas. A heavy-set man in his early 60s, silver-haired, standing at a podium with the controlled confidence of someone who had never in his life been in a room where he wasn't the most powerful person present. Below the photograph was a name and a date. The name was Victor Halden. The date was 4 days ago. An obituary notice, 1 paragraph, from a Norwegian financial publication. Unexplained accident. Private vessel. Barents Sea. Reed sat very still for a long time. Then he picked up the sheet and walked back to the medical bay. Elena was awake. She was always awake. He was starting to understand that this wasn't insomnia or anxiety. It was a baseline state. She simply didn't need as much unconsciousness as other people. He held up the photograph without saying anything. She looked at it. Something moved through her face. Not surprise, not guilt. Something more complicated than either. Something that looked, in the low light of the medical bay, like the expression of a person confirming something they had already known and had been waiting to have confirmed. Victor Halden, Reed said. He's dead, 4 days ago. Maritime accident. Elena said nothing. Was it an accident? She looked away from the photograph. Her hand moved to the rifle stock, not gripping it, just resting her palm against it in a gesture that was almost absent-minded. Almost. No, she said. It wasn't. The room held that answer for a long moment. Outside, the Barents Sea moved in the darkness, cold and enormous, and completely indifferent to everything that had just changed. Reed reached his office and locked the door behind him and stood at his desk with both hands flat on the surface, looking at the photograph of Victor Halden. Dead 4 days. Identified by Elena, who had no identity, who had survived 3 days on wreckage that had been deliberately destroyed, in the time it took to glance at a photograph. He thought about the module in the rifle stock. He thought about what Elena had said. Don't touch it. Not yet. Not until I decide you're worth trusting. Not yet like she was buying time. Not yet like she had a plan. He was still thinking about it when Mercer appeared at his door with his tablet and an expression that had gone past careful into something else entirely. Commander, Mercer said, I took a closer look at the stock exterior. Sorry, just the exterior. I didn't touch anything inside. But from the weight distribution and the acoustic signature when I tapped the composite, he stopped. Say it. The module isn't the only thing in there. Mercer turned the tablet to show a thermal imaging scan he'd somehow run without Reed's knowledge, and probably without explicit authorization. The stock of the rifle glowed with a distributed heat signature. Not from a single device, but from something that ran the full interior length of the stock, embedded in the composite. What am I looking at? Reed said. Data storage, Mercer said. A lot of it. Whatever she's been carrying in that rifle. He met Reed's eyes. It isn't just a record of one shot, sir. The thermal signature indicates a storage system with a capacity I've never seen in a device this size. Reed looked at the image for a long time. It isn't just a record of one shot. He thought about a woman who had survived 3 days in the Arctic because she had trained herself not to die. He thought about fingerprints that had been deliberately removed. He thought about a ship that had been blown apart from the inside and a defense contractor whose obituary used the phrase unexplained accident in the same paragraph that included the words Barents Sea. He thought about what kind of person would go to those lengths to carry something in a rifle stock through the worst conditions on the planet rather than simply releasing it into the water. The kind of person who knew that what they were carrying was the only thing keeping them alive. Reed slept for 3 hours on the cot in his office and woke up with the thermal image still on his tablet and the specific alertness of someone whose brain had kept working while the rest of him shut down. He lay still for a moment, listening to the station's ambient sounds, the low vibration of the heating system, the distant percussion of weather against the exterior hull, the muffled exchange of the watch rotation down the corridor, and thought about a dead man named Victor Halden and a woman who had confirmed his death with the expression of someone closing a book they'd already read. He was showered and back at his desk by 0530. Mercer arrived at 0615 without being summoned, which told Reed that Mercer hadn't slept either. He came in carrying his tablet and a thermos of coffee that he set on Reed's desk without asking and poured into both cups that were already there, which told Reed something else, that Mercer had decided, sometime in the night, that he was in this regardless of what this turned out to be. She's awake, Mercer said. She's always awake. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. Mercer sat. Commander, I want to examine the interior of that stock. She said no. She said not yet. That was last night. He turned the tablet to show a series of notes he'd made. Handwritten, Reed noticed, not typed. I ran everything I could on the exterior components. The scope system is the most identifiable element. The glass is a proprietary grind, which means someone had it custom made by an optical manufacturer. I found 3 facilities in the world that do work at this quality level. One in Germany, one in Japan, one in Arizona. I reached out to my contact at the Arizona shop this morning. Reed looked at him. You reached out at 0500. He's an early riser. Mercer didn't pause. He said the grind pattern is consistent with a commission they fulfilled about 4 years ago. Client was a private procurement entity. He didn't remember the name, but he remembered the order because the specifications were unlike anything he'd done before. Maximum optical clarity at ranges between 2 and 4,000 meters. Anti-reflective coating optimized for low-light Arctic conditions. Reticle calibrated for a specific ballistic coefficient he'd never seen in any commercial round. The room was quiet for a moment. He kept the commission records? Reed said. Apparently he keeps everything. He's going to pull the file and send me what he has. Mercer leaned forward. Commander, whoever built that rifle didn't build it in a garage. This was a funded program, an organized, well-resourced, long-term program, and whatever's in that stock. He stopped. Started again differently. A data recorder with that storage capacity built into a weapon that doesn't officially exist, carried by a woman whose fingerprints were surgically removed. That's not an accident. That's architecture. Someone built all of this very deliberately. I know, Reed said. So we need to get into the stock. I know that too, but... Elena was sitting on the edge of the bed when Reed came in, dressed in station-issue clothing that was too large for her and that she'd rolled and tucked with the habitual economy of someone accustomed to making do. She was eating, which Voss had told Reed she'd resisted until an hour ago, when she'd apparently decided that maintaining caloric deficit no longer served whatever internal calculation she was running. The rifle was on the bed beside her. Her hand was not on it. That was new. Reed sat in the chair. He didn't have coffee this time because he didn't want the interaction to feel managed. She looked at him over the edge of the cup she was holding. You want to get into the stock? Yes. What changed? Mercer found the optical commission records. You were built by a program, a private, funded, organized program that procured custom equipment and then made sure none of it could be traced. He watched her face. Victor Halden. The connection is there. I don't have the shape of it yet, but it's there. Elena set down the cup. She looked at the rifle for a moment. Not the way someone looked at a weapon, but the way someone looked at an object that had been with them through something too large to describe. There was history in that look, more history than Reed could see the edges of. If I let Mercer open the stock, she said slowly, what he finds is going to change everything about what happens next. To me, to this station, to you specifically. She met his eyes. Are you prepared for that? I've been in this since I ordered the deviation to fly toward that heat signature, Reed said. I was prepared for it then, I just didn't know it. Another long pause. The module will need a specific sequence to open, she said. I'll give it to Mercer. He opens only the main partition. There are 2, and I'll tell him which one. The second partition stays closed until I decide otherwise. She picked up the cup again. Her hand was completely steady. Those are my terms. Accepted. She told him the sequence. Mercer set up in the storage room adjacent to the medical bay because it had better lighting and a work surface he could actually use. He brought his full kit, torque drivers, a fiber optic inspection scope, anti-static mat, the specialized picks he'd machined himself because the commercial options were never quite right, and laid everything out with the methodical care of someone preparing for surgery. Elena sat in a chair against the wall with her hands in her lap. She didn't hover. She watched with the focused patience of someone who had spent years sitting very still and waiting for conditions to align. Reed stood near the door. Mercer followed the sequence Elena had given him. A specific combination of pressure points along the interior of the stock channel, applied in a particular order with particular timing. It took him 4 attempts to get it right. On the 4th, something clicked that wasn't mechanical in the normal sense. More like a release of tension that had been holding since the weapon was last closed. And a section of the composite stock separated cleanly along a seam that was invisible until the moment it wasn't. Inside was a module roughly the size and shape of a large external hard drive, matte black, with no external markings except a small indicator light that was currently dark. Mercer looked at it without touching it. Power source? Integrated, Elena said. It's been in low power mode. There's a contact on the left side. Mercer found the contact and applied current from a bench supply, and the indicator light came on. Amber first, then cycling to green over about 15 seconds. A display surface on the top of the module, which had been invisible in its off state, became active. Text appeared. Not a standard file directory. A log. Sequential entries, each with a header that contained date, time, location coordinates, and a series of atmospheric measurements. Mercer read the first entry. Read the second. Read 3 more. Then he stepped back from the table and looked at Reed with an expression that had gone somewhere past professional neutrality into territory that didn't have a comfortable name. These are mission logs, Mercer said. Yes, Elena said. How many entries? 17 confirmed engagements. The number sat in the room. Mercer turned back to the display and started scrolling. Each entry was dense with data. Barometric pressure readings taken at multiple elevations, wind speed and direction measurements logged at intervals throughout a preparation period that, in the entries Reed could see Mercer skimming, ran to 10, 12, 14 hours. Temperature gradients, humidity, atmospheric density calculations. And at the end of each entry, a ballistic solution. A firing solution, Reed corrected himself internally, because that was what this was. Expressed as a set of adjustments applied to a specific point of aim and then a result. A single result per entry. 1 shot, 1 result. Mercer stopped scrolling. He'd reached an entry and he wasn't moving past it. Reed walked to the table and looked at the display over Mercer's shoulder. The entry was formatted like the others. Date, 14 days ago. Location. GPS coordinates that Reed's mental map placed somewhere in the Barents Sea region, north of the Norwegian coast. Atmospheric data that ran for 11 hours of preparation logs. And then the firing solution, and below it, a result field that contained 2 items, a confirmation notation and a single number, 4,112 meters. Reed read it twice, said nothing, looked at Mercer. Mercer's jaw was tight. I know what it is. The world record confirmed engagement distance is 3,540 meters, set in 2017. Mercer stopped. This isn't a record that gets broken by increments. A 572-meter improvement on the current record is not a marginal gain. That's not how ballistics works. The physics involved? I know how it works, Reed said, which was not entirely true, but was true enough. He turned to Elena. She was watching them both with that contained expression that he was beginning to understand was not coldness, but rather the learned behavior of someone who had spent years in environments where showing your hand cost you more than you could afford. Whatever she was feeling about the two of them looking at that number, she had decided not to show it. 4,112 meters, Reed said. Yes. 1 shot. Yes. What were the conditions? For the first time since he'd known her, 36 hours, which felt much longer, something shifted in Elena's face that wasn't the guarded assessment she usually wore. Something that might have been, if he was reading it correctly, a kind of bitter precision. The expression of someone describing a thing they are simultaneously proud of and cannot feel uncomplicated pride about. Wind at the firing position was 23 kilometers per hour, bearing 247 degrees, she said. Wind at the target position was 17 kilometers per hour, bearing 215 degrees. The bullet passed through 4 distinct wind layers over its flight path. Temperature differential between firing position and target was 11 degrees Celsius. I was operating at 340 meters elevation. The target was at sea level. She paused. Travel time for the projectile was 7.2 seconds. But Mercer made a sound that was not quite a word. 7 seconds, Reed said. 7.2. She looked at him steadily. In 7 seconds, the Earth rotates. Wind conditions at any given point along the flight path change. A human target moves. All of those variables have to be calculated in advance because once the round leaves the barrel, there is nothing you can do. You've already made every decision that matters. She picked up the cup again. I began preparation for that shot 11 hours before I took it. The storage room was very quiet. Mercer sat down heavily on the stool behind him, which he did without appearing to notice he was doing it. He was staring at the display. What was the target? Elena was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Open the target field on that entry. It will require the second half of the sequence I gave you." Mercer looked at Reed. Reed nodded. Mercer applied the additional inputs. The target field, which had displayed only an encrypted hash, resolved into plain text. Victor Halden. Reed had known it was coming, knowing it didn't make it smaller when it arrived. He stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the name of a man whose obituary described an unexplained maritime accident and whose real cause of death was a 7.2-second wait, followed by certainty. "He was your target," Reed said. "He was the target assigned to me," Elena said. The distinction was quiet but precise. "By whom?" She looked at him for a long time. The green indicator light on the module cast a faint colored edge along the side of her face. Outside, the station's heating system cycled, and the distant sound of the sea moved under everything like a continuous note. "That," she said, "is in the second partition." Voss found Reed in the corridor outside the storage room at 1100 hours and told him that whatever Elena was, she wasn't a standard military asset and wasn't a civilian and wasn't fitting neatly into any category Voss had a protocol for. And what was Reed planning to do about the fact that they had a confirmed shooter sitting in their medical bay with no identity and 17 mission logs in her rifle stock? "I'm planning to find out who sent her," Reed said. Voss looked at him for a moment. "And then? And then I'll figure out the next part." "That's not a plan, Mason. It's the beginning of one." He paused. "How is she? Medically?" "Stable. Better than stable, actually. Her recovery rate is... Look, I've treated SEALs who'd been through bad water scenarios, and their recovery timelines were nothing like this. She's operating at about 70% of what I'd estimate her baseline is, and her baseline is clearly not normal." Voss crossed her arms. "She asked me about the station's communication systems this morning." Reed went still. "What about them?" "Whether they were monitored, whether transmissions from the station were logged through a central relay or went direct." Voss paused. "I told her I didn't know the technical details. She said thank you and went back to looking at the wall." Reed turned that over. A person asking about communication security was either planning to send something or planning to prevent something from being sent. Given what he now knew about the contents of that module, he had a reasonable idea which it was. He found Yates and told him to run a check on all outbound transmissions from the station in the last 48 hours. Standard protocol, nothing flagged or alarmed. Just a clean log check. Yates didn't ask why. Reed was grateful for that. The optical commission records from the Arizona shop arrived at 1340. Mercer brought them to Reed's office, and they went through them together. The commission had been placed 4 years and 3 months ago, paid through a procurement entity incorporated in Luxembourg with billing contact information that traced to a post office box in Vienna. The specifications were exactly as Mercer's contact had described, and at the bottom of the order form, in the field for End User Declaration, was a company name that meant nothing to Reed until he cross-referenced it against the shell company chain Yates had identified from the destroyed vessel's registration. 2 steps removed from the same parent entity. "They built the program," Mercer said. "The whole thing, rifle, optics, training, all of it procured through a network of cutout companies that trace back to Halden," Reed said, "and whoever Halden was working with." Mercer tapped the commission document. "Commander, this isn't a government program. There's no government fingerprint anywhere in this paper trail. This is private. A private entity built a precision shooter program, equipped it with custom weapons that don't exist in any registry, and operated it. For what? Contract eliminations? Apparently. And then they assigned Elena to kill Halden. And then something changed," Reed said. "She was supposed to die with the ship." Mercer sat back. "She knew. She had to have known. Otherwise, why would the module be formatted as a legal record? The ballistic data, the atmospheric logs, the target identification, all of it is authenticated. Time-stamped, GPS verified, formatted like evidence. Because it is evidence. Against who? Reed didn't answer because Elena was standing in the doorway. She'd walked down the corridor from the medical bay on her own, which Voss had not authorized, and which Elena had apparently not found relevant. She was wearing station-issue boots now, and she moved without any sign of the physical damage she should still have been managing. The rifle was in her right hand, carried muzzle down with the casual security of someone who had been carrying weapons for so long, the weight had become part of their own. She looked at the commission documents on Reed's desk. "You found the optics trail," she said. "Luxembourg to Vienna," Reed said. "Same chain as the vessel registration." She nodded once. She came to the desk and set the rifle against it and looked at the documents for a moment, scanning them with the rapid processing of someone who read dense technical material the way other people read text messages. "You're missing one layer," she said. "Between the Luxembourg entity and the Vienna billing address, there's a Liechtenstein holding company. It's not in the procurement documents because it was never used for purchases. It's the actual control structure." She looked up. 3 people sit on the board of that holding company. Halden was one of them. "Who are the others?" Reed said. She looked at him with those gray eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw something in them that might have been the functional equivalent of trust. Not given freely, not given warmly, but given. A decision made. "Open the second partition," she said. "Mock." The second partition required Elena's physical input. A biometric component Mercer hadn't anticipated, a contact surface on the module that read thermal pattern rather than fingerprint, which explained why her ablated fingertips hadn't been a problem. She placed her palm against it for 3 seconds. The display changed. What appeared was not another log. It was a directory, and the directory was large. Mercer scrolled through it slowly, and the scrolling took a long time, and by the time he reached the bottom of the directory, his expression had undergone a series of changes that ended somewhere Reed didn't have a precise word for. Financial records, transaction logs, communication transcripts, corporate documents, intelligence reports with header formats Reed recognized from joint operations briefings. Not civilian, not commercial, but sourced from within classified government channels, which meant someone with access had been feeding information into this archive for a long time. Personnel files, operational orders, a complete accounting of a private assassination program that had been running for, according to the earliest dated document in the directory, 9 years. 17 confirmed engagements in Elena's mission log. The directory suggested there had been others before her. "How long have you been building this?" Mercer asked quietly. He wasn't looking at Elena, he was still looking at the display. "Since the 3rd mission," she said. "I understood what it was by then, what I was being used for." Her voice had the quality of something stated rather than felt, a report, not a confession. Every shot authenticated another piece of evidence. The ballistic data, the GPS verification, the atmospheric logs, all of it proves I was present at a specific location at a specific time and engaged a specific target. It proves the program existed. It proves the orders came from somewhere. She paused. It proves who gave them. Reed looked at her. Halden ordered his own. Halden ordered 9 of the 17. The other 8 were ordered by the other 2 board members. She moved to the display and touched the screen, navigating the directory to a folder that contained 2 personnel files. She opened them both. "These are the people who built the program. These are the people who decided which names went on the list. These are the people who decided my name should go on the list when I refused the last order." Reed looked at the files. He recognized one of the names. Not because he knew the person, he didn't, but because the name appeared in the header of 2 classified defense procurement reviews he'd participated in over the past 3 years, and seeing it now, in this context, on this display, produced a sensation in his chest that was unrelated to temperature but felt like cold. "This person has DOD access," Reed said. "Senior advisory level," Elena said, "has had it for 6 years." Which means the program had access to classified target packages, to personnel files, to protected witness databases. She said it evenly, without emphasis, because emphasis wasn't required. Every name on that list, every person eliminated over 9 years, Their security was compromised through the program's access to classified government systems. The program didn't just have private funding, it had institutional penetration. The storage room was very quiet again. Mercer had stopped scrolling. He was sitting with his hands in his lap, looking at the display with the expression of someone who has just understood the full scope of something and found the scope to be significantly larger than anticipated. "How many people know this exists?" Reed said, meaning the archive. "3," Elena said. "The people who built the program, who know the rifle was never recovered. Me." She looked at him. "And now you." Reed thought about Voss asking him what his plan was. He thought about Yates running a quiet log check on outbound communications. He thought about a ship blown apart in the middle of the Barents Sea and a woman who had survived it because she had spent years making herself impossible to kill. He thought about what happened next. "There's someone outside the program's reach," he said slowly. "A federal prosecutor. Independent, no DOD affiliation, appointed by a circuit court rather than executive branch. His name is Daniel Cross. He's been investigating defense contractor fraud for 3 years, and he's built a reputation for—" "I know who Cross is," Elena said. Reed looked at her. "You do?" "He was on my list of contingency contacts if the archive needed to go to a legal authority that couldn't be compromised through the program's access channels." She paused. "I never expected to need a naval commander to make the introduction." Reed almost said something and stopped himself, because what he almost said was something with a dry edge that would have been inappropriate given the weight of what they were standing inside of, and he was trying to maintain some professional calibration. "I'll reach him through a back channel," Reed said. "It won't go through the station's primary relay." "No," Elena said. "It won't." She held his gaze. "And Commander, once you contact Cross, this becomes something that can't be contained to this station. You understand that?" "I've understood that since I ordered the helicopter to deviate," Reed said. She studied him for a moment. "Why did you order the deviation?" It was the first personal question she'd asked him. He thought about it honestly before he answered. "Because it pulsed," he said. "The signal pulsed. Dead things don't pulse." Something moved across her face, brief, complicated, and gone before he could name it. "No," she said quietly. "They don't." Reed was drafting the encrypted message to Cross at 2200 when Yates appeared in his doorway for the second time in 2 days, with the second version of the expression that meant something had changed. This time it was closer to urgency. This time Yates came fully into the room and closed the door behind him. "The transmission log check," Yates said. "Station's been clean. Nothing anomalous going out." He paused. "But I expanded the check to incoming signals in the last 6 hours. And there's a pattern in the noise band on the long-range frequency that isn't weather and isn't standard naval traffic." Reed looked up from the draft. "What is it?" "Encrypted burst transmission, short, repeated, directional." Yates set his tablet on the desk. "Whoever's sending them is northeast of our position, range approximately 40 to 60 kilometers, and they're not broadcasting. They're pinging, trying to get a response from something specific." He met Reed's eyes. "The frequency band they're using is proprietary. I've only seen it in one place before." He pointed to the module display, still active on the secondary screen at the corner of Reed's desk. The module had a receiver. Someone in the Barents Sea was trying to contact the rifle. Reed was on his feet before Yates finished the sentence. "How long has the signal been active?" "First ping I can identify was approximately 90 minutes ago. Could have started earlier, but the pattern is designed to blend into background noise. I only caught it because I was already in the frequency logs looking for outbound anomalies." Reed crossed to the secondary screen and looked at the module display. The green indicator light was steady. Nothing on the display surface suggested the receiver had responded. No incoming data, no acknowledgement handshake. But the fact that someone knew the specific proprietary frequency meant the fact that someone knew the rifle existed and had not gone down with the ship. "They're not sure it survived," Reed said. "If they knew the module was active and receiving, they'd be transmitting data, not pinging. They're pinging because they're looking. They don't know if there's anything left to find." "That changes if they pick up the station's electronic signature and start correlating," Yates said. "We're the only fixed installation within 60 kilometers. If they're methodical, and given the frequency knowledge they are, they'll work out the geometry. How long? Yates considered it with the honest caution he applied to estimates. If they're running the analysis in real time, 6 hours, maybe less. Reed looked at the draft message to Cross on his primary screen. Half finished. He would have to finish it now. "Find Elena," he said. "She's in the bay. Get her." Elena came in without hurrying, which Reed was starting to understand was not composure as a performance, but composure as a functional state, the absence of wasted motion, including the wasted motion of urgency when urgency didn't change the physics of a situation. She looked at Yates's tablet. She looked at the frequency pattern he'd isolated. She sat down in the chair across from Reed's desk and was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. "That's a recovery sweep," she said. "We figured. They use it when an asset goes dark and they're not sure of the status. It's designed to activate a dormant beacon in the module, a response signal that would tell them the rifle is intact and locatable." She paused. "The beacon is disabled. I disabled it before the ship went down, but they don't know that. So they'll keep pinging until they're satisfied it's gone, or until they triangulate the source of the absence." "Meaning the station," Reed said. "Meaning the station." She looked at him. "How long ago did you say you were going to contact Cross?" "I was drafting the message when Yates came in." "Send it now. The content doesn't have to be complete. Cross needs enough to begin moving, not the full archive. The full archive can follow through a secure channel once he confirms receipt and establishes a protected line." She leaned forward slightly. "Commander, once they identify this station as the location of the module, the recovery sweep becomes a recovery operation. These are not people who send strongly worded letters." Reed looked at Mercer, who had followed Elena in and was standing near the wall with his arms crossed. Mercer gave him a slight nod that communicated, "She's right, and we both know it." Reed turned back to the draft and started typing. The message to Daniel Cross took 11 minutes to compose in its compressed form, a summary of the archive's existence, its contents in broad category terms, the names of the 2 remaining board members, and the frequency evidence suggesting active hostile interest in the rifle's location. Reed encrypted it through a personal key he'd established outside of official channels 3 years earlier during a joint operation with the Norwegian intelligence unit, which meant it would not route through the station's primary relay and would not appear in the transmission log. He sent it at 22:31. Then he pulled Yates and Mercer and the station's 2-person security team, Petty Officers Gallardo and Tron, both force protection qualified, into the briefing room and told them what they were dealing with in terms precise enough to be useful and abbreviated enough to fit inside the time available. Gallardo, who was 26 and had the particular stillness of someone who had been in enough situations to understand when a situation was serious, said, "What's our authorization posture?" "We operate under standard station defense protocols until I hear from Norcom, which I'm going to brief at 0600. Reed paused. "Anything before 0600 falls under my discretionary command authority." Tran, who was quieter than Gallardo and had a habit of looking at secondary exits when she entered rooms, said, "Do we know what we're defending against?" "Professional operators, private, not state, probably small team. This isn't a military operation. It's a recovery mission. They want the rifle and the module. They don't want noise." "What do they do with witnesses?" Gallardo asked. Nobody answered that because the answer was apparent and saying it out loud didn't add anything. "Harden the storage wing," Reed said. "Module stays in storage. I want eyes on every exterior access point from 2300 onward. Nothing moves without my authorization." He looked around the room. "Questions?" Tran raised a hand halfway. "The woman. Elena. What's her status?" "She's a material witness under my protection." "Does she have a weapon?" Reed looked at Mercer. Mercer looked at the table. "She has a rifle," Reed said carefully, "that requires conditions we don't currently have to operate. Treat her as a protected non-combatant." He said it without particular conviction, and nobody in the room appeared to believe it with particular conviction, which was fine. The important thing was that it was the official position. Elena caught him into the corridor at 2310. "You told them I'm a protected non-combatant," she said. "That's your classification. You know that's inaccurate." I know a lot of things that are inaccurate. He kept walking. She walked beside him without apparent effort, matching his pace exactly. What do you need? Access to the station's perimeter sensor data. He stopped. Why? Because if I'm going to understand the geometry of an approach, I need current readings from the northeastern quadrant: wind, visibility, surface conditions. She said it the way she said most things. Not a request, not a demand, something in between that assumed competence on both sides. The signal is coming from the northeast. That's not coincidence. It's a staging direction. Water approach would give them cover from radar by using the station's own superstructure as masking. Reed looked at her. You're thinking about their approach vector. I'm thinking about what I would do. She met his eyes. And I'm trying to determine whether what they're planning is what I would plan. And if it is, then we have less time than Yates estimated. She paused. And there's something I need to tell you that I should have told you earlier. Reed turned to face her fully. There was something in her voice, not quite different, but slightly less controlled. A thread of something that her training hadn't quite been able to compress all the way down. Tell me now, he said. She held his gaze for a moment. The last mission. The one I refused. The target was a hydrologist named Arvid Strand. He worked for a Nordic environmental research consortium. He'd been consulting on deep-sea mineral rights in contested Arctic waters, and his assessment was unfavorable to several extraction contracts that the program's backers held. She stopped, started again. He had a daughter, 7 years old. I reviewed the surveillance package before the operation, and she was in every photograph. At the research station with him, at their apartment in Bergen, at her school. Her jaw was set. The operational parameters didn't specify collateral constraints. Reed was very still. They would have put her in the scope, he said. I would have been the one with her in the scope. Elena's voice was flat, but it cost something to make it flat. He could see that, just barely, in the set of her shoulders. I declined the mission. I told my handler it was operationally unsound. I didn't tell him the real reason because the real reason wouldn't have functioned as a sufficient argument. She looked away. 48 hours later, the vessel I was traveling on had a bomb in its hull. The corridor was very quiet. The heating system cycled. Somewhere forward in the station, Gallardo's boots moved across a metal deck. How long were you in the program? Reed asked. 8 years? How old were you when they recruited you? The question landed differently than the others. She looked back at him. 17, she said. Reed absorbed that, filed it somewhere he would look at later, when there was time to look at things properly. Right now, there wasn't. I'll get you access to the sensor feed, he said, and I need you to tell me honestly. The rifle in its current condition. Can you use it? Define use. Fire it. She was quiet for a moment. The optics survived intact. The action is functional. I checked it after Mercer closed the stock. The round I have chambered has been in extreme temperature conditions, but the brass and primer are intact. She paused. At conventional range, yes. At the distance it was designed for, I'm not in condition for an 11-hour preparation sequence. I'm not asking about 4,000 meters. Then yes, I can use it. He nodded. They walked toward the operations center, and he thought about a 17-year-old who had been recruited into something that had no good name and had spent 8 years becoming the most precise instrument of that thing, and had then refused, at the cost of everything, because a 7-year-old was in the photographs. He thought about what Voss had said. Her body has adapted to it. He thought about what it cost to adapt something to a thing like that. The sensor data confirmed Elena's analysis by 2340. The northeastern quadrant showed 2 anomalies that the automated system had classified as debris drift, but that resolved when Elena applied a set of mental corrections for sea state and current pattern that she explained with the rapid precision of someone who had spent years reading environmental data into the movement profile of 2 small, rigid-hull inflatable boats running with engines at minimum throttle. 2 boats, she said, 4 to 6 personnel per boat. They'll stage approximately 800 meters out and send a lead element forward while the main element waits. How many in the lead element? Mercer asked. He'd come into the operations center and was looking at the sensor display over her shoulder. 2, maybe 3. It's a reconnaissance and recover pattern. They want to confirm the module is here and extract it without engagement if possible. She pointed to the display. They'll use the maintenance access on the northeastern face. It's the lowest point of the station's perimeter above waterline, and it has the smallest sensor footprint. She looked at Reed. It also happens to be 15 meters from the storage room. Of course it does, Gallardo said from across the room. Reed looked at the display and thought about what he had. 2 force protection personnel, Mercer, who was capable but not a trained combatant, Yates, who was not and had never pretended to be, Voss, who was in the medical bay with what was now a mostly empty patient room. He thought about the kind of team that a well-funded private operation sent to recover a classified asset from a naval installation, even a small one. He thought about the gap between those two things. Options, he said. We lock down and call for support, Gallardo said. Norcom can have an asset here in 4 hours minimum, Yates said. Weather window is closing. A fast response boat couldn't make speed in these conditions. Air support? The Seahawk is down for scheduled maintenance until 0400 and the rotor head is partially disassembled. Mercer said it without apology. I can have it ready in 2 hours if I start now, but that's the fastest. Reed looked at Tran. If they come in through the maintenance access, what are we working with? 2 choke points before they reach the storage wing. The access corridor from the northeastern face runs through a service junction and then a sealed fire door. The fire door is rated, but it's not a security door. It's delay, not denial. She paused. Maybe 4 minutes from breach to storage room if they move fast and know the layout. They'll know the layout, Elena said. Everyone looked at her. They had access to classified facility databases, remember? Nobody said anything for a moment. I need them slowed at the first choke point, Elena said. She wasn't looking at Reed. She was looking at the sensor display with an expression of concentrated calculation, her eyes moving across the data in small, precise movements. If they're delayed long enough at the junction, the geometry changes. Changes how? Reed asked. The northeastern maintenance access has a sight line from the secondary observation post on the exterior upper deck. She traced a line on the display with her finger. It's exposed, which is why it's not a defensive position. But if someone is in position on that deck before the approach team clears the waterline, the approach team doesn't know they're there. The upper deck is open, Tran said. Wind is 30 knots out of the north. Temperature is... I know what the temperature is, Elena said quietly. Tran looked at Reed. Reed looked at Elena. You're proposing to put yourself on an exposed deck in 30-knot winds at -8 Celsius with a rifle that's been through 72 hours of Arctic immersion. I'm proposing to do what I'm capable of doing. She turned from the display and looked at him directly. You put Gallardo and Tran at the junction choke point. Mercer goes to the Seahawk and starts the rotor head. Not for deployment, but so the sound gives them something to work with when they're estimating our response capacity. Yates monitors the sensor feed and tracks the approach. You manage communications. She paused. And I go to the upper deck. In what capacity? In the capacity of the person on this station who actually knows what's coming. Reed studied her for a long moment. He thought about the 11 hours of preparation she'd described for a 4,000-meter shot. He thought about 7.2 seconds of travel time and a bullet that had to account for the rotation of the Earth. He thought about a 17-year-old being recruited and an 8-year mission and a ship blown apart in the Barents Sea and the way she'd carried the rifle for 72 hours in water that should have made her let go of everything. Gallardo, he said. Get her a radio. Tunk. She was on the upper deck by 0:15. Reed watched her go through the interior camera feed with the specific feeling of someone who had made a decision they couldn't reverse and had decided not to spend energy regretting it. She moved through the station with her hand on the rifle and her head slightly forward, scanning. At the access door to the upper deck, she paused for approximately 2 seconds, the only hesitation he'd seen from her since she'd grabbed Briggs's wrist in the Barents Sea. And then she pushed through into the wind and dark and was gone from the interior cameras. The exterior camera on the upper deck was compromised by sea spray, but he could see the outline of her, the long silhouette of the rifle, the dark shape of her against the rail. And then she moved to a position behind the ventilation housing that was out of the camera frame and he couldn't see her anymore. Upper deck, this is operations, he said into the radio. You're clear. How's your position? Static. Then her voice, wind compressed but clear. Workable. Copy. Approach team is Yates? They're moving, Yates said, his voice tight. Lead element has separated from the staging position. 2 contacts, moving toward the northeastern face at approximately 4 knots. Estimated time to maintenance access, 12 minutes. 12 minutes. Reed keyed his radio. Gallardo Tran, junction position, now. Moving, Gallardo said. The sound of boots on the deck. Mercer. Already at the Seahawk, Mercer said. I'm going to start the APU in about 4 minutes. It's going to be loud. Good. Make it loud. The 12 minutes passed. The way minutes passed in situations where time was simultaneously the most and least useful thing available, each one granular and distinct and slightly too short. Reed stood at the operations console and watched the sensor display and listened to the radio and counted things he couldn't control. At 8 minutes, Yates said, Lead element is at the maintenance access. They're cutting the exterior lock. At 9 minutes, Mercer started the Seahawks APU, and the station filled with a rising turbine whine that bled into every space and made the walls slightly alive. At 10 minutes, Gallardo said, very quietly, I have movement in the service junction. 2 contacts. Reed keyed the radio. Hold position. Do not initiate. Copy. Silence on the junction channel for 40 seconds. Then Gallardo again. They've stopped. They know we know. Reed thought about that. A professional team that knew their approach was compromised would do one of 2 things: withdraw and regroup, or escalate to force. The calculus depended on how badly they needed the module and how much noise they were authorized to make. The answer came from a direction he hadn't anticipated. Elena's voice on the radio. Reed, go ahead. The main element is moving. They're not waiting for the lead team. Both boats are heading for the northeastern face. A pause, wind heavy. They've changed to a force protocol. They're coming in hard. Reed looked at Yates. Yates was already nodding. The sensor display was lighting up with the movement signatures of what was now 6 to 8 contacts converging on the station's northeastern perimeter. Gallardo? I see it, Gallardo said. We can't hold the junction against that many. Fall back to the storage room. Seal the fire door and brace it. Copy. Falling back. Reed keyed to Elena's channel. Upper deck. What's your read? Her response was several seconds late, which told him she was occupied with something other than the radio. When it came, it was brief. I have the maintenance access sightline. Lead element is still in the corridor. They haven't cleared the junction yet. They're waiting for the main element to reach the exterior. What are you telling me? I'm telling you the next 60 seconds matters more than everything after it. Reed looked at the sensor display. 6 contacts on the water, 2 in the corridor, 4 minutes from breach to the storage room. That was Tran's estimate, and that was with an unopposed approach. With Gallardo and Tran at the fire door, maybe 6. But 6 minutes against that many personnel was an arithmetic problem with a bad answer, unless the approach didn't happen the way they'd planned it. Elena, he said. I know, she said. He hadn't said anything. She'd already understood what was on the other side of her name. I need confirmation from you, he said, because he wasn't going to not say it. I need you to tell me what you're going to do. A beat of wind on the line. I'm going to show them that the rifle survived, she said. The shot came at 0041. Reed heard it as a compressed crack through the station's superstructure. Not the full report of a rifle without suppressor, but the supersonic signature of a projectile passing through air at extreme velocity, arriving before the muted thump of the suppressed discharge had time to follow. It was less loud than he'd expected and somehow more definitive. On the sensor display, one of the water surface contacts stopped moving. One boat. The engine signature went dead and the thermal profile flattened to the ambient sea temperature, and the contact began to drift with the current. Upper deck, Reed said. He was aware that his voice was controlled, and he was making a specific effort to keep it that way. Status. Disabled the port engine on the secondary boat, Elena said. Her voice was completely level. Wind noise. Nothing else. The hull is intact. Personnel are unharmed. They are no longer making forward progress. She had put a round through an outboard engine on a rigid hull inflatable boat, moving at speed in 30-knot winds and near zero visibility. In the dark, at a range Reed could estimate from the sensor display was somewhere between 400 and 600 meters. From an exposed deck in conditions that should have made the shot physically impossible. Yates was staring at the sensor display with his mouth slightly open. Reed didn't have time to feel the full weight of what had just happened, but he registered it, the edges of it, the shape of it. He registered it and filed it. "Contacts?" he said. "The lead element is withdrawing through the maintenance corridor," Yates said. His voice had recovered professional function, if not professional calm. "The primary boat is holding position. They're not advancing. The disabled boat is drifting." He watched the display. "They're not—" He stopped. "They're withdrawing. Primary boat is turning. They're pulling back." The room was quiet except for the turbine whine of the Seahawk's APU and the ventilation system and the ambient noise of the sea. Reed keyed the radio. "Gallardo, Tran, hold position at the fire door. Don't move until I give the all clear." "Copy." "Mercer, stay with the bird." "Understood." He keyed to Elena's channel. "Upper deck, talk to me. Static. Longer than before." The wind moved through the line. "They're gone," she said finally. "Both contacts are at distance and moving away from the station." Another pause. "Northeast. Back the way they came." "Yes." Reed let out a breath he'd been holding in the compressed way that didn't show and looked at Yates, who looked back at him with the expression of someone who had been part of something and was still in the process of understanding what part that was. "Get me Norcom," Reed said, "and get me a line to Cross's office. I want to know if he received the message." "Yes, sir." Reed walked to the corridor and through the station toward the access door to the upper deck. He pushed through into the wind and cold and stood on the deck for a moment, adjusting to the dark and the noise of the weather. Elena was exactly where the ventilation housing's shadow suggested she would be. Kneeling, the rifle on its bipod on the deck rail, her eyes still at the scope. She was not looking at the water anymore. She was running a function check on the action, cycling the bolt, checking the chamber, the automatic discipline of a person who treated a weapon the same way after firing as before. She heard him come out and looked up. "They'll confirm the shot when they reach the disabled boat," she said. "They'll know the module is functional and the operator is alive." Which changes their calculus. It changes everything. She pulled the rifle off the bipod and stood. The wind hit her and she didn't adjust to it. She just stood in it, the way she stood in everything. They came here to recover an asset. Now they know the asset recovered itself and has already fired. She looked at him with those pale gray eyes, dark-ringed from fatigue she wasn't going to admit. They'll go back to the people who sent them. And the people who sent them are going to make a decision about whether to escalate or whether the exposure risk has become too high. What do you think they'll decide? "I think," she said carefully, "that it depends on whether Daniel Cross has received your message." Reed pulled out his radio. "Yates? Cross." Yates's voice came back almost immediately, and the quality of it, the specific controlled relief underneath the professional register, told Reed the answer before the words arrived. "He received it, sir. Confirmation came through the back channel 4 minutes ago. He's acknowledged receipt and he's requesting a secure line for the full archive transfer." Reed looked at Elena. She was looking at the dark water to the northeast where the boats had gone. Her face in the station's running lights was unreadable in the way that faces were unreadable when what was underneath them was too large and too old to surface quickly. "It's moving," Reed said. "Cross has it. Once the archive transfers, this becomes a legal matter in the hands of someone they can't reach." She didn't respond immediately. The wind moved over them both. The Seahawk's turbine sang its single note from the hangar below. "Elena." She turned her head. There was something in the set of her mouth that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite grief, and sat in the space between them where language didn't reach very well. 8 years, she said. That was all she said. It was enough. Reed nodded once and didn't try to put words next to it. They stood on the exposed upper deck of an Arctic station in the dark and the cold, and below them, the Barents Sea moved in its enormous, indifferent way, carrying the dispersing wake of 2 boats and the absence of a shot that hadn't needed to kill anyone to change everything. She bent and picked up the rifle, checked it again, not because it needed checking, but because some habits existed below the level of decision. "We should go inside," she said. "Yeah," Reed said, "we should." They went inside. The secure line to cross came through at 0118, routed through the back channel Reed had established and bounced through 2 relay nodes that Yates had configured with the focused efficiency of someone who understood that the technical details were the difference between a conversation that stayed private and one that didn't. Reed took the call in his office with Elena in the chair across the desk and the door locked. She'd set the rifle against the wall, not on the desk, not across her lap, but against the wall at a remove that struck Reed as significant in a way he didn't try to quantify. Like she was practicing distance from it. Like she was deciding whether she still needed it the way she'd needed it for the past 8 years. Cross's voice came through with the slight compression of a heavily encrypted line, which made him sound slightly more deliberate than he probably was in person. He was in his 50s, Reed knew from his public record. A career federal prosecutor who'd spent 12 years in financial crime before moving to defense contractor fraud. Appointed to an independent investigative position by a circuit court mandate 2 years after a congressional oversight failure that had embarrassed enough people in enough branches of government that an independent authority had seemed like the least bad option. He had a reputation for methodical prosecution and a personal history of not being moved by pressure from directions that usually moved people. "Commander Reed," Cross said, "I've read your summary. I need you to understand the scope of what you're telling me before we go further." "I understand the scope," Reed said. "Then you understand that 2 of the names in your summary have active DoD advisory clearances, and one of them is currently serving on a defense acquisition oversight panel that reviews classified procurement." "I understand that." "And you have a primary witness who doesn't exist in any database, who has confirmed participation in 17 lethal operations conducted under private contract, and who is currently in your custody at an Arctic forward station." "That's correct." A pause. Not hesitation. Assessment. "Is she willing to cooperate with a formal proceeding?" Reed looked at Elena. She was looking at the desk surface between them with the focused, slightly internal expression she got when she was listening to something while simultaneously running a parallel calculation. "Yes," she said, without looking up. Loud enough for the line to carry. Another pause. "She can hear this?" "She can hear everything," Reed said. That seemed like the appropriate arrangement given that it's her life we're discussing. Cross took a moment with that. "All right. What's the condition of the archive?" "Intact, authenticated. The ballistic and atmospheric data in the mission logs is GPS verified and time-stamped through a system that can't be retroactively modified. The verification protocol is embedded in the hardware, and it requires physical access to the module to alter, which means every record in that archive is forensically sound." Reed paused. "There are also 9 years of financial records, communication transcripts, and operational orders. The paper trail goes from the program's inception to the last mission." "Can you transfer the full archive through your current channel?" "Mercer has been working on a compressed format. We can transmit in segments. It'll take approximately 4 hours through this relay configuration." "Do it." Cross's voice had shifted slightly. Not urgency exactly, but the quality of someone who has identified the thing they've been building toward and is now orienting to it. "I'm going to need that archive secured in a federally protected server before morning. Once it's there, I can begin the legal framework for protective orders on the named individuals and their associated entities." He paused. "Commander, are you aware that a missing person report was filed with Norwegian maritime authorities 48 hours ago? An unidentified woman reported by a fishing vessel that observed wreckage in the Barents Sea and subsequently noticed a heat signature on debris." Reed looked at Elena. She looked back at him with the expression of someone who had expected this. "I was not aware of that," Reed said. "The report was filed by the vessel's captain, but it was accessed within 2 hours of filing by an entity using credentials belonging to a senior staff member of a Brussels-based security consultancy." Cross let that land. "The consultancy shares a registered address with one of the shell companies in your summary. They've been looking for her since before we found her," Reed said. Since before you found her, Cross confirmed, which means they have resources inside European maritime databases. You should assume they have visibility into Norwegian Coast Guard communications as well. Another pause. Commander, I need you to be very careful about what you transmit through any channel that touches official naval relay infrastructure. Already ahead of you. Good. A brief silence, the kind that meant something was being decided. I'm going to have 2 of my investigators on a flight to Tromsø within the hour. They'll need surface transport to your position. I assume that's arrangeable. It's arrangeable, Reed said, and made a mental note to call the Tromsø naval liaison at an hour that was going to be unkind. One more thing. Cross's voice was careful now. The individual named in your summary with the DoD advisory clearance. The acquisition oversight panel he's serving on is currently reviewing a classified procurement package that includes sensor systems for Arctic maritime monitoring. He paused. The kind of systems that would give someone visibility into the operational status of forward stations like yours. Reed sat with that for a moment. How long has he been on that panel? He said. 14 months. 14 months. Reed had commanded Kestrel for 14 months. I'll expedite the archive transfer, Reed said. Please do, said Cross, and signed off. Reed spent 40 minutes coordinating the transfer with Mercer before the knock came at his office door. He knew from the quality of it, 3 sharp raps, no pause, that it was going to be a conversation he hadn't requested and probably wasn't going to enjoy. Rear Admiral Thomas Vick was not physically present at Kestrel, which was the only thing currently in Reed's favor. He was on the encrypted video link from Norcom Command, and his face on the screen had the specific configuration of a senior officer who has been briefed incompletely in the middle of the night on something that has made their morning substantially more complicated. Commander Reed, Vick said, I've been told you have a civilian casualty. No, scratch that. You have an unidentified civilian at Kestrel who participated in an unauthorized live fire incident directed at what appears to be a private maritime vessel in international waters at 0041 this morning. I want you to tell me what happened. There was no casualty, sir. A vessel engine was disabled. An engine was disabled by a rifle round fired from my station by someone who is not a member of your crew and who doesn't appear to exist in any personnel database I've been shown. Vick's voice was controlled, which Reed knew from experience was more dangerous than if it were not. You want to explain the chain of authorization there? The fire was defensive, Reed said. We had a multi-contact approach on the northeastern face of this station. I assessed the threat as credible and imminent, and I made a command decision to neutralize the approach. By having an unidentified civilian fire a weapon from my station. By deploying the most capable asset available to me at the time. Vick stared at him through the screen. Behind his eyes something was moving. Not just anger, which Reed had expected, but something more complicated. A calculation. Reed. Who is this woman? A material witness in an ongoing investigation under the authority of federal prosecutor Daniel Cross. That landed. Vick's expression shifted fractionally. Cross. Yes, sir. You've been in contact with Cross. As of approximately 1:18 this morning, yes. I transmitted a summary to his office via a back channel at 2231 last night, when I assessed that routing through primary naval relay posed a security risk given the nature of the information involved. Vick was quiet for a moment. You bypassed the official relay. I did. And the nature of the information is detailed in the brief I'm transmitting to you as we speak, sir. I'm also transmitting the same brief through Cross's secure channel to ensure parallel record. Reed kept his voice level. I want to be transparent about the reason I'm transmitting to Cross concurrently. The brief contains the name of an individual with active DoD advisory clearance who is identified in the archive as a principal organizer of the operation that targeted this station last night. I considered it appropriate to ensure the information reached an independent legal authority simultaneously with the chain of command. Another silence. Longer this time. Who's the name? Vick said. Reed told him. The silence after that was the longest one yet. On the screen, Vick's face did something that took genuine effort to contain. You're certain, Vick said. The archive is forensically authenticated. I'm not making an allegation, sir. I'm transmitting authenticated evidence. The allegation is the archives. Vic turned away from the camera briefly, a gesture that Reed read as the need to do something with his hands that wasn't appropriate for a video call with a subordinate. He turned back. How long until the full archive is in Cross's possession? Approximately 3 hours from now. And the woman? Protected material witness. She stays at Kestrel under my authority until Cross's investigators arrive. You're prepared to defend that position if I direct otherwise? Reed looked at him steadily through the screen. This was the moment. He'd known it was coming since 2023, the previous night when he'd sent the message to Cross without logging it. I'm prepared to explain my reasoning in any proceeding you find appropriate, sir. But yes, she stays. Vic studied him for a long moment. Reed held it. I'm going to need that brief in my hands in 20 minutes, Vic said, and I'm going to need you to brief me personally on every decision you made in the last 36 hours, in sequence, with your reasoning at each step. He paused. And Reed, if this archive turns out to be what you're saying it is, then you've had a very complicated 3 days. He paused again. Good work. He said it the way officers of his generation said things they meant but found slightly uncomfortable to say, which was clipped and passed quickly. He signed off before Reed could respond. Elena was in the corridor outside his office when he opened the door. You heard that, he said. It wasn't a question. Some of it. She was leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and the rifle at her feet. She'd been there for a while. There was a quality to her posture that came from having stood in one place long enough that the body had accommodated it. The Admiral. He'll move carefully now. He has to. Reed rubbed his face. He was running on 3 hours of sleep and the specific depleted alertness that came after sustained adrenaline, the clarity that remained when the adrenaline stopped carrying it. Cross's investigators will be at Tromsø by early afternoon. Surface transport from there is 4 to 5 hours depending on conditions. So tonight, Elena said. Tonight. He looked at her. You need to sleep. I slept. When? She didn't answer, which was an answer. You've been awake for... He stopped calculating because the number was going to be unpleasant. Sit down somewhere and close your eyes for 2 hours. That's not a request. You can't order me to sleep. I'm not in your chain of command. I'm not ordering you. I'm asking. He held her gaze. 2 hours. The archive transfer is running. Gallardo and Tran have the perimeter. Yates is monitoring the sensor feed. There is nothing that requires you to be upright for the next 2 hours except the habit of not being otherwise. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was somewhere between considering and something else he didn't have a clean name for. Then she reached down and picked up the rifle and walked toward the medical bay without saying anything. He took that as agreement. He was reviewing the brief he'd sent to Vic when Mercer appeared at 0330 with his tablet and the expression that was becoming familiar as the expression Mercer wore when the data had done something unexpected. Reed looked up. What? The archive transfer is running clean. We're at about 60% through. Mercer sat. He didn't set the tablet down, which meant what was on it was what he wanted to talk about. While the transfer was running, I went back through the mission logs, all 17 entries. And? The logs authenticate Elena's presence and the engagements. That's their primary function. I understand that now. But the metadata on each entry, the preparation logs, the atmospheric data, there's something in there that's not just ballistic calculation. He turned the tablet to show Reed. She was logging other things during those preparation windows. Observation data, movement patterns, communication intercepts, things that had nothing to do with the shot, but that she recorded anyway, embedded in the atmospheric data as a secondary data stream. Reed looked at the tablet. She was documenting the operations. Everything around the operations, the people who briefed her, the communication protocols, the vehicles and vessels used for insertion and extraction, the support personnel, the physical infrastructure. Mercer tapped the screen. It's not just evidence of what she did, Commander. It's a complete operational map of how the program worked, who was involved at every level. The logistics chain, the communication chain, the financial approval chain. He paused. She's been building a case for 8 years, not just collecting evidence, building a prosecutable case. Every mission log is a structured evidentiary record that documents not just the engagement, but the full operational context. Reed sat back. He thought about a 17-year-old recruited into something she hadn't had enough experience to fully refuse and hadn't had enough years to fully understand. He thought about the third mission. She'd said the third mission was when she understood what it was. He thought about what it cost to understand something like that and keep going anyway, and what kind of internal calculation produced the decision to start recording instead of stopping. Some people would have run. Some people would have simply stopped working and taken the consequences. Some people would have found a way to disappear. Elena had stayed, had kept doing the thing, had used every mission as an opportunity to document the people who were ordering the missions, because she'd understood, probably very early, he thought now, probably earlier than the third mission, but the third mission was when she'd made the decision that an accusation without proof was just noise, and noise was easy to silence. Proof was harder. The prosecutors are going to need time to work through all of it, Reed said. Months, probably. Maybe longer. Mercer set the tablet down. Commander, she built this in the worst possible conditions, with no institutional support, over 8 years, while operating inside the program and being monitored and assessed by the same people she was documenting. If any of the preparation logs had been examined closely by someone who understood what they were looking for, she would have been killed a lot sooner than the ship. Yeah. Mercer was quiet for a moment. She's good, sir. I mean, the shot last night, that was something, but this, he gestured at the tablet. This is something else. This is a different kind of capability entirely. I know, Reed said. Cross's investigators arrived at 1847 the following evening aboard a Norwegian Coast Guard vessel that Cross had arranged through channels that bypassed the compromised maritime database, a detail that told Reed something about how Cross had been operating long before this particular case arrived in his hands. The investigators were a man named Halverson and a woman named Park, both in their late 30s, both carrying the specific energy of people who had been working continuously and had reached the phase of continuous work where fatigue was simply a background condition rather than a variable. They set up in the briefing room with the archive on a hardened drive that Mercer had prepared and 2 laptops and a communication link to Cross's office. And they began their intake process with the systematic efficiency of people who had done this kind of intake before and understood that the shape of the first 24 hours determined a significant portion of what the following months would look like. Reed sat in on the first hour of their session with Elena. He hadn't planned to. He'd planned to give them the room and wait in his office, but Halverson had asked if he'd be willing to remain and provide operational context, and Elena had not objected, so he'd taken the chair near the door and mostly watched. Elena answered their questions with the same measured precision she applied to everything. She was not defensive. She was not emotional. She was methodical in a way that was, Reed suspected, both her natural register and a performance of it, the real thing and the useful version of the real thing, layered. Halverson asked about the recruitment. She described it in clean, factual terms, a talent identification program that had approached her through an academic mathematics competition when she was 16. 2 years of what had presented as an elite scholarship program with military and technical components. At 17, a recruitment conversation with a man she identified only by his operational name, which was in the mission logs. She'd signed paperwork she was told was a security clearance agreement. It was not. You didn't know it wasn't a legitimate program, Park said. I knew it was classified, Elena said. I didn't know it was private. When did you find out? The third mission. She said it without inflection. The target was a trade official from a Central Asian country who had been blocking a mineral extraction contract. I was told he was a foreign intelligence asset. I believed it. She paused. After the mission, I found, in the preparation materials I still had access to, a financial document that had been included by mistake in my operational package. It detailed a payment made by a private entity to a front organization in exchange for the removal of the blocking official. She looked at Halverson. It wasn't a national security operation. It was a commercial transaction. The room was quiet. You kept the document, Park said. I kept everything after that point. Park made a note. Why didn't you leave the program? Elena looked at her directly. Where would I have gone? I was 20 years old. I had no legal identity. By the time I reached the program's operational phase, my documents had been reprocessed, and I existed only in their system. I had no family contact. That was part of the isolation protocol in the first year. I had no institutional allies, and I had participated in 2 confirmed lethal operations. She paused. Leaving the program without protection would have produced one of 2 outcomes. They would have found me and killed me, or I would have attempted to report to a legal authority and been unable to prove anything, at which point the program would have found me and killed me. So you stayed, Halverson said. I stayed, and I built the case. She said the next part without drama, which made it more effective than drama would have been. Every mission after the third was a documentation event, as much as an operational event. I treated each preparation window as a collection opportunity. The people running the program monitored my ballistic logs. That was standard. They didn't look for secondary data streams in the atmospheric records because it didn't occur to them that I would know how to embed them. How did you know how to embed them? Park asked. For the first time in the session, something shifted in Elena's expression. The faintest trace of something that, in another person and another context, might have been wry. They gave me excellent training, but the second attempt came at 0230. It was not boats. Yates caught it first, an anomalous signal on the station's aviation radar, a low-altitude contact approaching from the northwest on a flight path that didn't match any logged air traffic in the region and was actively suppressing its transponder. He had it on the display for 40 seconds before it disappeared from radar, which told Reed the aircraft, small, fixed wing, he estimated from the radar return, had dropped below the radar horizon using the sea surface as a mask. They changed vector, Reed said. And platform, Yates said. Whatever that was, it wasn't boats. It dropped something before it went below the radar horizon. How far out? Yates was calculating. 60 kilometers, maybe 55. A drop at 55 kilometers in these conditions? Reed stopped. He was already moving. It's personnel. They jumped. In this weather? Reed was already on the radio. Gallardo Tran Boat. Stand 2, all access points now. He keyed to Mercer. Are the investigators still in the briefing room? Affirmative, Mercer said. I'm outside the door. Keep them there. Lock it from the outside. He thought for half a second. Elena, I'm here, she said on the radio. She'd been monitoring the channel. I heard. They jumped from that aircraft. How long to swim in from that drop point in these conditions? A pause. For a trained cold water infiltration team with the right equipment? 45 minutes from jump to waterline at the station. Maybe less if the current is favorable, and it is tonight. Another pause. They're not trying to be quiet this time. No, Reed said. They're not. They're coming for the drive. She meant the hardened drive, the archive in physical form in the briefing room. They know Cross has a copy, but they want the original destroyed. It changes the authentication chain if the original hardware is gone. Reed thought about that for 2 seconds. 2 seconds was all he had. Mercer, he said. The drive. Take it out of the briefing room and get it to the medical bay. Tell Halverson and Park to stay put and stay low. He paused. Elena, I need you to tell me where you want to be. A brief silence. Where do you need me? She said. The phrasing was different from what she would have said 12 hours ago. He registered it without examining it. Upper deck again, but I'm not asking you to engage. I'm asking you to observe and report. Positions, numbers, movement. I need your eyes. Copy, she said. Just that. Tran's voice came on the channel. Commander, I have a contact in the water. Northeast face, 40 meters out. No lights. 40 minutes. They'd made it in 40 minutes. Reed locked down the station, sealed the external doors on automated bolts, and pulled Gallardo back from the perimeter to a defensive position at the interior junction. The station was not designed to be a fortress, but it had the advantage of limited access points and the disadvantage of limited defenders, and the specific strategic problem that the people coming in the water had nothing to lose from noise because they'd already moved past the phase of this operation where noise was avoidable. He was at the operations console watching the sensor display when Elena's voice came through the radio at 0314. 6 contacts, she said. Her voice was entirely level. Wind noise, steady behind it. 2 attempting the maintenance access, 2 on the south face. They found the secondary ladder. It's not on the station plan, so someone gave them updated schematics. She paused. 2 holding in the water, port side. They're a blocking element. They're not coming in. They're making sure nothing leaves, Reed said. Yes. How close are the 2 on the south face? They're already on the exterior deck. Reed keyed to Tran. South face. 2 contacts on the exterior, approaching your position. I have them, Tran said, clipped and tight. What happened over the next 11 minutes was not a clean thing. It was not a thing that could be described cleanly, because combat, even the constrained interior close-range version of it that Reed had trained for and Gallardo and Tran had trained for, was not clean. It was loud and short, and it moved in wrong directions, and decisions had to be made before there was enough information to make them. And afterward, there was always a version of the event in your head that went better, and a version in the real world that was what it was. Gallardo took a hit to his vest at the maintenance junction, a round that would have done significant damage without the ceramic plate, which was the difference between being winded and incapacitated and being winded and functional. He was functional. Tran neutralized both south-face contacts with efficiency and the specific controlled aggression of someone who had trained for enclosed space engagement and found that the training held under pressure, which was not guaranteed and was always a relief when it did. The 2 contacts at the maintenance access were stopped by the fire door and by Reed, who was on the other side of it, and by the 37 seconds it took them to breach the door, which was not enough time to reach the storage room or the medical bay, but was enough time to tell Reed what he needed to know about what they'd come for. They weren't armed with the precision weapons of a surgical recovery team. They were carrying the short-barreled, high-capacity loadout of people whose mission was to destroy things rather than retrieve them. The archive. They'd come to burn the station. At 03:25, Elena's voice came through the radio again. The water element is withdrawing, port side, moving south. A pause. The aircraft is back. It's orbiting at low altitude, 7 kilometers out. They're preparing for extraction. Reed looked at the 2 individuals currently zip-tied in the corridor. Gallardo's work, the contacts from the maintenance access, disarmed and secured with the economical thoroughness of someone who'd done this before. He looked at Gallardo, who was sitting against the wall catching his breath with his hand pressed against his vest where the round had hit. You good? Reed said. Good, Gallardo said, in the tone of someone who meant it, but was also going to feel that tomorrow. Reed keyed the radio. Elena? The aircraft. Can you ID it? Small twin engine, no markings visible from this angle. A pause that went slightly longer than the others. Commander, the extraction orbit. The aircraft is not going to land. It's a rope extraction. They're pulling the water team. Let them. Copy. Come inside, he said. She didn't answer for a moment. He could hear the wind on the channel, and under it the distant drone of the orbiting aircraft, and under that the sea, always the sea, doing what it did regardless of what happened on the surface. The drive is intact, she said. Intact. Medical bay. He paused. Elena, come inside. A longer pause. Yes, she said. All right. She came in through the access door 4 minutes later, carrying the rifle muzzle down and moving with the controlled, slightly careful motion of someone managing physical exhaustion through an act of will. She was not going to say she was exhausted. He was not going to point it out. She stopped in the corridor and looked at the 2 zip-tied individuals on the floor. She looked at them for a moment with an expression that was hard to read. Not recognition exactly, but something adjacent. The look of someone who understood the type, even if they didn't know the individuals. They sent a different team, she said. Harder team, Reed said. They're accelerating the timeline. She looked at him. They know the archive is already with Cross. They know they're past the point where recovery is possible. This, she gestured at the corridor, the evidence of the past 11 minutes. This was about damage, about making noise, about making Cross's office hesitate. Will it work? No. She said it without uncertainty. Cross doesn't hesitate. It's his defining professional characteristic. She paused. It's why I put him on the contingency list. Reed looked at her for a moment. The corridor was lit by fluorescent strip lights that made everyone look slightly worse than they were, and Elena in those lights looked tired in a way that went past the physical. The tiredness of someone who had been holding something up for a very long time and had recently been permitted to begin setting it down, but hadn't yet worked out how to do it without dropping it. Halverson and Park are going to want to continue the intake session tomorrow, Reed said. I know. Vic is sending a support team. They'll be here by 800. I know that too. She looked at the rifle in her hand. At the corridor, at the door to the medical bay where the hardened drive was sitting in whatever improvised secure location Mercer had created for it. It's still here, she said, meaning the archive, meaning the 8 years of documented evidence that 2 attempts in 12 hours had not been able to destroy. Still here, Reed confirmed. She nodded once, the small deliberate nod of someone receiving information they needed, even though they already knew it. She walked toward the medical bay and he watched her go, and at the doorway she stopped with her hand on the frame. She didn't turn around. Gallardo, she said. He took a hit. Vest caught it. Good. She paused. Tell him I said good work. She went through the door. Reed stood in the corridor for a moment alone with the sound of the heating system in the distant sea and the 2 secured individuals on the floor who were having, by any measure, a significantly worse night than any of the people who had stopped them. He keyed his radio. Yates? Status on the aircraft. Extraction complete, Yates said. Aircraft is departing on a northwest heading, outside our radar coverage in approximately 4 minutes. Track it as long as you can. Yes, sir. Reed leaned against the wall and let himself stand still for 30 seconds, which was approximately 25 seconds more stillness than he normally permitted himself in an operational period, and then he went back to work. The support team from Norcom arrived at 0743, 40 minutes ahead of Vic's estimate, aboard a fast patrol vessel that came in hard against the station's southern dock with the focused efficiency of people who had been briefed en route and understood what they were arriving into. 8 personnel, 4 security, 2 communication specialists, and 2 individuals in civilian clothing who identified themselves only as federal liaisons and who went directly to the briefing room where Halverson and Park had resumed their session with Elena at 0600. Reed met them at the dock. He hadn't slept. He'd stopped expecting to. The senior security officer, a lieutenant commander named Okafor, walked the perimeter with Reed in the gray Arctic morning and listened to the operational summary without interrupting, which Reed appreciated. When Reed finished, Okafor looked at the northeastern maintenance access, the cut lock, the scratched frame where the breach team had worked, and then looked at the 2 individuals Reed's team had secured, currently in a storage compartment that had been repurposed as a temporary holding space. You did all right with what you had, Okafor said. Gallardo and Tron did the work, Reed said, and the shooter on the upper deck. Reed looked at him. She identified herself as a protected witness. Anything she did during the security incident was within that context. Okafor looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to push on something. He decided not to. Understood, he said, and they went inside. Cross called at 0900 on the secure line. Reed took it in his office with the door open this time, because the reasons for the closed door had mostly passed. The archive is authenticated, Cross said. He didn't waste time on preamble, which Reed had come to understand was his consistent professional characteristic. My forensic team worked through the night. The hardware authentication is clean. The GPS verification and timestamp protocol are exactly what your witness described. The chain of custody is intact. What's the legal picture? The legal picture is substantial. A pause. We executed protective orders on the named individuals and their associated entities at 0600 this morning. Coordinated with European counterparts, the Liechtenstein Holding Company is under provisional freeze by the financial authority there, and 2 of the Brussels-based entities have had their banking access suspended pending investigation. Cross paused. One of the named individuals is in custody. He was detained at Oslo Airport at 0530, attempting to board a private charter. Reed absorbed that. Which one? Cross gave him the name. Not the one with the DoD advisory clearance, the other one. The second board member from the holding company, a defense financier who had, according to the personnel file in the archive, been the operational architect of the program from its inception. The person who had decided 9 years ago that a private precision shooter network was a viable and profitable enterprise. And the other board member, Reed said, the DoD clearance, voluntarily surrendered his clearance at 700 this morning and is currently in conversation with his attorney about the terms of a cooperation agreement. Cross's voice had a specific quality, not satisfaction, because Cross didn't seem like a man who expressed satisfaction before the work was done, but something close to the acknowledgement that the work was going the way work was supposed to go when the evidence was sound. The cooperation agreement, if it proceeds, will be in exchange for information about the program's penetration into classified government systems, which is a separate investigation from the criminal case and is being handled by a different authority. How deep does the penetration go? That is a question I'm not in a position to answer yet because the investigation is 4 hours old. A brief pause. Commander Reed, I want to be direct with you about something. The testimony of your witness, the corroboration she can provide for the archive material, the operational context she carries, is going to be central to making the criminal case prosecutable. The archive is extraordinary evidence. It becomes nearly invincible evidence when there's a living witness who can explain every entry in it from first-hand operational knowledge. She understands that, Reed said. Has she agreed to formal testimony? She's been in session with your investigators since 0600. I know. I've been reading the session transcripts in real time. Another pause, slightly different in quality from the others. She's remarkable, Commander. The structural coherence of the evidence she built, the way she embedded documentation in the preparation logs without triggering their monitoring, that took a quality of mind that is genuinely uncommon. He paused again. She also did it for 8 years under conditions of sustained isolation and threat. That's a different kind of quality. I don't have a professional term for it. Reed thought about that. What happens to her legally? She participated in the operations. That is a complicated question with a complicated answer. Cross's voice was careful. She was recruited as a minor into what was misrepresented to her as a legitimate classified program. Her participation occurred under conditions of coercion and identity suppression. She declined the final mission and became a target herself. The evidence she preserved, at significant personal risk over an extended period, is the foundation of a case that will likely result in the prosecution of 9 individuals and the dismantling of a network that operated with impunity for nearly a decade. He paused. I have significant prosecutorial discretion in how I approach her role in this. I intend to exercise it. Reed let out a breath. She's going to need an identity. That process has already begun, Cross said. My office is working with a federal identity restoration program. It will take time. These things always take more time than they should, but she will have documents. A legal name, a provable existence. He paused. Her actual birth name is in the archive. In the personnel file the program kept on her. She may or may not choose to use it. Reed hadn't known that. He sat with it for a moment. Thank you, he said. Thank your witness, Cross said. She did the work. We're just the mechanism she built to receive it. Akip. Halverson and Park finished their intake session with Elena at 1400 and emerged from the briefing room looking the way people looked after 7 hours of dense evidentiary testimony, depleted in a specific way, carrying something they hadn't been carrying when they went in. Halverson found Reed in the corridor and shook his hand with a firmness that communicated more than professional courtesy. She's thorough, he said. Everything she told us maps to the archive exactly. There are no gaps, no inconsistencies. It's the cleanest witness testimony I've encountered in 11 years of this work. She had a long time to prepare it, Reed said. She had a long time to live it, Halverson said, which was the more accurate version of the same thing. Elena came out of the briefing room 10 minutes later. She was carrying the rifle. Reed noticed that she was carrying it differently than she had when she'd first arrived. Not across her chest, not in the defensive grip she'd maintained through the first 36 hours, but loosely at her side. The way you carried something that was heavy and that you were thinking about putting down. She found him in the corridor, and they walked together toward the operations center without deciding to, which was the kind of movement that happened between people who had been through something and had developed a navigational shorthand without discussing it. "Cross-called," Reed said. "I know, Halverson told me." She was quiet for a few steps. "One of them is in custody, as of this morning, and the other is cooperating. Trying to." He paused. "The one in custody, the program architect, he's going to fight extradition. He'll lose." She said it without heat, as a factual assessment. "The archive has 9 years of his communication records. His attorney will tell him to stop fighting within a month." They reached the operations center. Through the windows, narrow, reinforced, salt-hazed, the Barents Sea was doing what it did in late Arctic morning, moving in long gray swells under a sky that was overcast but bright, the light diffuse and flat, and somehow tremendous in the way that Arctic light was tremendous, like it was coming from everywhere at once. Elena stood at the window and looked at it. Reed stood beside her and didn't say anything for a while, which felt like the right thing. "I haven't seen daylight in 4 days," she said. Not a complaint, an observation. "It'll be dark again in 6 hours." "I know." She watched the water. "It looks different from here than it did from the water." "I'd imagine it does." "From the water it was—" She stopped, started again in a slightly different direction. "I was in it for about 14 hours before I found the wreckage section. The explosion happened at night. The debris field was spread. I had to locate the largest section by sound. The way it moved in the swell was different from smaller pieces." She paused. "I thought about letting go of the rifle several times. It would have made swimming easier." Reed looked at her profile. "Why didn't you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Because if I let go of it, the evidence went with it. And if the evidence went with it, the only thing I'd spent 8 years building was at the bottom of the Barents Sea." She paused. "And because I was angry." She turned to look at him. "That's the honest version. I was very angry, and letting go felt like conceding something to people who had decided I wasn't worth the cost of letting live." Reed held her gaze. "Good reason," he said. Something moved in her face, that complicated thing again, the one that lived between expressions and didn't have a precise name. "You ordered the deviation," she said. "You already asked me that." "I know. I'm asking again." He looked at the water for a moment. "Because it pulsed," he said. "I told you that." "You told me that," she agreed. "But you came out on the deck last night after the shot, and you didn't have to. You stayed through both approaches when you could have handed this to Norcom and protected your command record." She paused. "I'm asking why." It was, Reed thought, a genuinely fair question. He'd been asking it himself in the compressed background way he asked himself things during operational periods. The questions that ran underneath the decisions without having the space to surface until afterward. "Because you weren't a body," he said finally, and everything after that, all of it, was just following through on what that meant. He looked at her. "You were alive. You'd chosen to stay alive in conditions that argued strongly against it, that seemed like something that deserved to be met." She was quiet for a long moment. "Thank you," she said. Just that. 2 words, said without performance, which made them the realest 2 words in the room. Vic arrived in person at 1600 on a helo that came in through a weather window that was narrower than Vic probably liked and tighter than the pilot probably preferred. He came aboard with the contained energy of a senior officer who had spent the last 18 hours managing something significant from a distance and had finally gotten close enough to manage it directly. He and Reed spent 45 minutes in Reed's office going through the operational timeline. Vic listened without interrupting except twice, once to ask a specific question about the decision to bypass the primary relay, which Reed answered fully and without apology, and once to ask about the upper deck firing incident, which Reed described in precise operational terms. When Reed finished, Vic was quiet for a moment. "The round she put through that outboard engine," Vic said. "Range and conditions. Approximately 520 meters per Yates's sensor data. 30-knot winds, near zero visibility, darkness, moving target." Reed paused. She had a suppressed platform and no spotter. Vic sat with that. I've been briefed on the 4,112-meter record in the archive. Yes, sir. That shot last night. In those conditions. That's not a normal capability. No, sir. It's not. Vic looked at him steadily. What's your read on her? Reed thought about how to answer that honestly and concisely. She's the most capable person I've encountered in 14 months of commanding this station. She built a prosecutable legal case against a 9-year private assassination network while operating inside it, using the program's own operational structure as her documentation framework, with no institutional support, starting at 17 years old. He paused. She also spent 3 days in the Barents Sea holding on to evidence because she was angry, and she doesn't concede things to people who underestimate her. Vic looked at him for a moment. You like her? I respect her, Reed said. That's different. Is it? Reed didn't answer that because Vic was already moving on, which was either professional courtesy or the recognition that the answer didn't matter to the operational picture. Cross's office has authority here, Vic said. My role is support and containment. I'll be coordinating with Norcom on the security incidents and ensuring the station's operational record is properly documented. He paused. Your team performed well, Commander, under circumstances that were well outside the station's operational parameters. They did, Reed agreed. Gallardo especially. I'll note it. Vic stood. The woman, Elena. What does she need from us going forward? Reed thought about it. Time, he said, and a name. Beshem. Cross's federal liaisons, the 2 in civilian clothing who'd arrived with Okafor's team, requested a session with Elena at 1800 that lasted 2 hours and involved paperwork Reed wasn't privy to. What he understood of it, from Halverson's brief summary afterward, was that it formalized the cooperation structure, established the protective framework Cross had described on the call, and initiated the identity restoration process. Elena came out of the session at 2000 carrying a folder of documents and the rifle and sat down in the operations center in the chair she'd occupied the night before. She set the folder on the console in front of her. She set the rifle against the wall. Then she sat with her hands in her lap and looked at the folder without opening it. Mercer was in the room doing something at the secondary console, and he looked at her and then looked at the folder and then went back to what he was doing, which was the right move. Reed came in 10 minutes later and sat in the chair beside her. Identity documents, he said, nodding at the folder. Provisional. The formal process takes longer. She was quiet. My actual name is in there, the one I was born with. She looked at the folder. I haven't used it in 11 years. Are you going to use it now? A long pause. I don't know yet, she said. It belongs to someone who was 16 and good at mathematics and believed that hard work produced outcomes proportional to effort. She paused. I'm not sure that person and I are the same person anymore. Probably not entirely, Reed said, but that's not specific to you. That's everyone who's been through something. She looked at him. That's almost comforting. Almost is the best I can do. Something genuine moved across her face, brief, unguarded, there and then managed back into the register she usually occupied. You're better at this than I expected a naval commander to be. I've had to be a lot of things in 14 months, he said, some of them by accident. She was quiet for a moment, then she reached out and picked up the folder and opened it and looked at the document inside. The provisional ID, Reed assumed, the first legal document with her name on it in over a decade. She looked at it for a long time without speaking. Reed didn't look at it. It wasn't his to see yet, and maybe not his to see at all. That was her document, her name, her thing to decide what to do with. She closed the folder. Elena Vasari, she said quietly. Not an introduction, just the act of saying it. Putting the name in the air to see what it felt like there. Reed let it sit. I was born in Ljubljana, she said. My mother was a schoolteacher. My father did something in logistics. I was never very clear on the details. A pause. He died when I was 11. After that, it was just my mother and me and the mathematics. She paused again. I don't know if she's still alive. The program severed the connection in the first year. I was told it was for her protection. Her voice didn't change on that. It didn't need to. That was probably true. It also served other purposes. Cross's office can find out, Reed said carefully. I know. She held the closed folder in both hands. I'll ask them, when I'm ready. He nodded. When she was ready was the right pace for all of this. Some things couldn't be rushed without breaking, and he understood by now that Elena had an accurate sense of what she could handle and what she needed time for, and the difference between the two. The following morning was clear. The first genuinely clear sky Reed had seen over the Barents Sea in a week. The Arctic light came in flat and white and cold and beautiful in the specific way of places that weren't built for beauty and managed it anyway. Reed was at the dock at 07:30 when the vessel arrived to take Halverson and Park and the federal liaisons back to Tromsø, along with the two secured individuals from the second attack who were being transferred to Norwegian custody pending international legal coordination. Okafor's security team would remain at Kestrel for another 2 weeks, which Vic had arranged before departing the previous evening. Elena came to the dock at 800. She was wearing her own clothing, what was recoverable of it, cleaned and dried in the station's laundry. The station-issue pieces she'd worn for 4 days were folded and left in the medical bay. She had the rifle. She had the folder with the provisional documents. She stood at the edge of the dock and looked at the vessel. Mercer came up beside Reed. He had a thermos of coffee, and he poured 2 cups with the same automatic courtesy he'd shown from the beginning and handed one to Reed without comment. "She's leaving with them," Mercer said. It wasn't a question. Cross's office arranged transport from Tromsø to Oslo. She'll be in a safe facility while the formal proceedings begin. Reed looked at the thermos rather than at the dock. She's agreed to serve as primary witness. It's going to be months of sessions before the first hearings. And then? And then she'll have options she didn't have before. He paused. Cross thinks the timeline to completed prosecution is 18 months to 2 years. After that, she'll have a legal identity, a clean slate from the cooperation framework, and the ability to go wherever she wants. Mercer was quiet for a moment. "The rifle," he said. Reed looked over. Elena was still at the edge of the dock, and the rifle was at her side. "What about it? Is she taking it?" Reed hadn't asked. He looked at the dock and thought about the rifle and what it had been. An instrument built to eliminate people, repurposed into the vault that documented the people who'd ordered the eliminations. A weapon that had become something more than a weapon without ceasing to be one. He walked to the dock. Elena heard him coming and turned. Her expression was its usual contained quality, but underneath it was something that had been different since she'd said her name out loud the night before. A very slight softening at the edges, like something that had been braced against pressure for a long time and had been given permission, cautiously, to ease. "The vessel's ready," Reed said. "I know." She looked at the water. "Clear today. First time in a week. The light is different." She looked at the sky. From the water it was dark. I'd forgotten what clear looked like. Reed stood beside her for a moment. The dock moved slightly under them, the faint rhythm of the sea, patient and enormous and indifferent in the way that only made the things happening on its surface feel more significant by contrast. "The rifle," he said. "What do you want to do with it?" She looked down at it, turned it slightly in her hand. Not a check, not a function test, just the movement of someone examining something familiar from a slight remove. "It's evidence," she said. "Cross's office needs it for the hardware authentication." "After the proceedings?" She was quiet for a moment. "I don't know if I want it back." She paused. "I thought I would. For 8 years it was the thing I held on to, literally and otherwise." She looked at it one more time. "But I think what I was holding on to was what was inside it, and that's out now. That's in Cross's hands, and in the legal system, and it's going." She looked up at Reed. "The rifle is just a rifle now." "Not just any rifle," Reed said. "No." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. "But I'm tired of carrying it." Reed nodded once. "I'll hold it for you. Official custody, per Cross's request for the proceedings. After that, it's your call." She held it out to him. He took it. The weight of it was real and considerable, and he understood for the first time in a tactile way what it had meant to carry it for 72 hours in the Barents Sea when everything in a person's body was arguing for less weight, not more. Elena straightened without it. Her shoulders did something, a minute adjustment, almost imperceptible, the physical equivalent of a held breath released. "Thank you," she said, "for the deviation. I told you. It pulsed. I know what you told me." She looked at him directly. "I'm thanking you for what it meant." Reed held her gaze. He thought about saying something and decided the silence was better, that it held more than words would without reducing it. "Take care of yourself, Elena Vasari," he said. She looked at him, a sustained look, the real one, not the assessment she wore for strangers, something in it that recognized what had passed between them without sentimentalizing it. "I've been doing that for 11 years, she said. "I'm getting better at it." She turned and walked up the boarding ramp. Halverson was there and nodded to her, and she nodded back, and they moved together down the vessel's corridor and out of sight. Reed stood on the dock with the rifle and watched the vessel pull away from the station, its engines deepening as it cleared the dock and found open water and turned south toward Tromsø. Mercer came up beside him. "You all right?" "Fine," Reed said. He meant it, mostly. "She'll be okay," Mercer said. "Yeah." Reed watched the vessel shrink into the gray-white distance. "She's been okay through worse." Mercer handed him the second cup of coffee, which Reed had never actually taken from him on the dock, and which Mercer had been holding this entire time with the patient good humor of someone who knew how to wait. Reed took it. The coffee was still warm. He stood on the dock until the vessel was a shape and then a suggestion, and then the open water closed behind it, and there was nothing to mark where it had been except the very faint white line of its wake, already being smoothed over by the sea. 6 weeks later, Reed received a brief encrypted message through the back channel he'd established for the Cross correspondence. It wasn't from Cross's office. It was from an email address with no name attached, created through an anonymizing service that would have been untraceable to anyone who didn't already know who sent it. The message was 4 words. Ljubljana. She was there. Reed read it twice, sat with it for a minute. Then he opened a new message and typed 3 words back. "Good. I'm glad." He sent it and closed the channel and went back to the work of commanding a station in the middle of the Arctic, where the sea kept moving and the days were getting fractionally longer, and the things that had happened on those particular days in January had begun to acquire the quality of events. Solid, finished, real, in the way that only things in the past were fully real. In Oslo, the first formal hearings opened on a Thursday morning in February, drawing the kind of attention that cases drew when they combined private military power, financial crime, and a 9-year documented record that left almost nothing to dispute. The program architect, extradited from Norway 3 weeks after his arrest, entered a not guilty plea that his attorney would quietly walk back within 6 weeks when the weight of the forensic evidence became clear even to people paid to argue against it. The board member who'd cooperated provided enough supplementary evidence to expand the investigation into 3 additional countries and 2 additional networks that had operated parallel to the original program. The individual with the DoD clearance served 11 months in federal detention before a plea agreement was finalized that required his cooperation with the classified systems penetration investigation and resulted in a restructuring of the advisory clearance vetting process, significant enough to become a small piece of policy history. The archive, authenticated, preserved, entered into legal record, did what it had been built to do. In a conference room in Oslo on a Wednesday afternoon in March, Elena Vasari sat across from a federal prosecutor and described in precise and measured terms the 11 hours of preparation that preceded a 7.2-second wait and a decision that could not be unmade once it left the barrel. She described it clearly, without evasion, and she answered every question that followed it. Afterward, she sat in a chair in the hallway outside the conference room and held a cup of coffee in both hands and looked at the middle distance. And Halverson, who had been in every session since Kestrel, sat down beside her and didn't say anything, because by then he understood that silence was sometimes what the moment required. She was 28 years old, and she had a name and documents, and the beginning, only the beginning, of the things that went with those. An apartment arranged through the protection program, a contact at the Oslo University who had looked at her mathematical background and suggested, carefully, that there might be options worth considering when the proceedings were further along. A weekly call with a woman in Ljubljana who had spent 11 years not knowing if her daughter was alive, and had spent the subsequent weeks learning who her daughter had become. None of it was smooth. None of it was simple. The past didn't dissolve when it was documented. It just became something you carried differently, in a different configuration, with the weight redistributed to places that could bear it better. But Elena Vasari had learned to carry difficult things. She had learned it in the hardest possible school, over the longest possible time, with no one watching and nothing to hold on to but the decision, repeated every day for 8 years, that the truth was worth preserving, even when preserving it cost everything. That decision, made quietly and alone in impossible conditions, and held on to through every force that tried to extinguish it, that was the shot that mattered. Not the one that traveled 4,112 meters, the one that traveled 11 years. There are people in this world who survive not because circumstances favored them, but because they decided in the dark, when no one was watching, that what they were carrying was worth the cost of carrying it. We rarely hear their names, but sometimes, if we pay attention, if we make the call, if we order the deviation when the signal pulses, we find them still holding on. And that makes all the difference.